أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى محمد وآله ثم الصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين واللعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذا أردنا أن نهلك قرية أمرنا مترفيها ففسقوا فيها فحق عليها القول فدمرناها تدميرا صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. The subject of our discussion tonight is the rise and fall of communities. Typically, when we speak of the rise and fall of communities, we witness this in human history as a very gradual process. However, there are examples in history where this rise and fall happens rapidly. And this is seen in the lifetime of the great personality that we have gathered to remember tonight, who is none other than the granddaughter of Rasulullah and the eldest daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Sayyida Zahra alayha salam, the sister of the sister of Al-Imamain Al-Hasani wal-Husayn. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Aqilat banu Hashim, alima ghayr muallima, ummul masaib wa sharikatul Husayn, Zaynab al-Kubra bint Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. We see in her life not only the rise and fall of nations, but we see her playing a direct role in this. And with all due respect to the Messenger of God and his household, the animosity of the Umayyads to the Hashemites was pre-Islam, from the era of Jahiliyyah. But Islam became the reason and the channel for their animosity towards the Prophet and his family after the message of Islam came. And where the Prophet ﷺ himself stood up against Abu Sufyan, and Amir al-Mu'mineen stood up against Muawiyah, and Imam al-Hasani and al-Husayn stood against Muawiyah and Yazid. But as men, they could only confront them in battle. Where all these great personalities stood up to speak against oppression, but were not able to demolish this dynasty, here we see Zaynab al-Kubra alayha salam on her own, with help from Imam al-Sajjad, but plays a pivotal role in decimating and demolishing that entire dynasty. So inshallah we will come to this in more detail. But when we study history, we find that the human race has a history of nations rising and falling. Almost any community that you know of has had power and has been the greatest nation on earth. From east to west, you study the Chinese, China at one point ruled. India, you had the Mughals, the Mongolians. Ethiopia, you had the Queen of Sheba. Egypt, you had the Pharaohs. Every nation has ruled. Byzantium, the Persians. The Muslims ruled the world at one point. Rome, the Crusaders. And we see that there is a cycle where nations rise and fall, rise and fall. Babylonia, which is today's Iraq. The Aztec, the Incas. You take the map of the world, and pretty much any continent you go to, you will find that humans have ruled and been the powers, and then they have declined. So It makes a very interesting subject to look at this closely and say, what causes nations to rise and fall? And from this then you can take lessons and drill it down to smaller nations, i.e. communities such as ours, to say what causes communities to thrive and what causes communities to fall. There is the perspective of the Quran as well that we shall come to. But there are historians who have analyzed this and tried to understand what causes nations to fall and rise. We have, for example, Orientalists and individuals like Samuel Huntington, those of you who have heard his name. In 1991, after the Cold War, he wrote a paper, The Clash of Civilizations, from where this term came about. And a few years later, to defend his position, he wrote another paper on this, in which he added, and the remaking of world order. So terms like New World Order and Clash of Civilization and so on. And he predicted that after the Cold War, when the clash between the US and the USSR then was coming to an end, the next clash of civilizations will be between the West and Islam. And obviously his views are very controversial, and there are those who support him and there are those who oppose him. But he has done his own analysis to give reasons as to what causes nations to rise and fall. So there are opinions such as, for example, the nations that are larger in number are the ones that will dominate over others, the ones that have more land and greater population. There is the opinion that it is economy that determines why a nation rises or falls. As long as a nation is an economic powerhouse and continues to grow in its wealth, it will rise. When it stagnates in its economy and begins dropping, it will fall. There is the opinion that the rise and fall of nations is determined by intellectual wealth and not financial wealth. That the nation that has the great minds of the world, and if they don't, they will import them through a brain drain. The nation that invents, that constantly is engaged in intellectual thought, research, activity, this is the nation that will rise above others. But when there is stagnation, it will fall. And there are examples in history of this, such as, for example, the Muslims ruled the world as long as they were the contributors to knowledge. Knowledge came from them. They were the custodians of knowledge. But when the Khilafah came to Turkey and they became the leaders and the rulers of Islam, and things that we have spoken about in the past, such as the invention of the printing press, where they were opposed to the use of the printing press because they believed, stamping on the Arabic script was blasphemy, then gradually others took over. Intellectual stagnation. So the nation that has the best universities, the greatest minds, will rise, and once it loses that, it will fall. There is the belief and the thought, and it could be a mix of several factors, but there is the belief that military prowess, military power is what determines the rise and fall of a nation. The nation that has in the past the biggest catapults, and in today's world the greatest number of nuclear bombs, will always be the most powerful nation. And that is why you see there is always this struggle to make sure that even though I will never use, I must have more power than others. When Russia recently announced they've got new weapons that can evade radar and so on, there was a lot of panic, right? Because now there is potential for another nation to become more powerful than we are, and we must always have the upper hand. So there is that idea as well, that the nations that had power, the Mongolians, for example, they just came and swept through the land and just took over. They shall rise and dominate until they fall. If you take this example to smaller groups, such as communities, you will find that the reason a community or a nation rises and falls is typically what happens is you have a large community, and then within that large community, a small group breaks away and forms their own community. And if you study the history of this, within the context of Islam, for example, if you study some of the Sufi groups, for example, who later went astray and so on, not all of them, but there are some like that, you will see that what happens is there is one individual in the community who is very powerful in his personality, a very strong personality, very charismatic, very inspiring. And he is able to attract a number of followers towards himself, and they rally around him. And so they break away and they form a community of their own. But then what happens is, as long as he is there and continues to exude his charisma, so to speak, and inspire, that community grows, it rises. At some point, he passes away, he dies, or moves away, or something goes wrong and he's no longer there. Now, the person who replaces him is not as charismatic, or as inspiring, or as powerful. Somebody has to fill that seat. So now you begin to sing, it plateaus, and then it begins to decline. The one who comes after him is even less inspiring. And eventually a few less well-meaning individuals come into play, corruption sets in, they take over, and then you hear of all kinds of scandals within that group. So when you study the nation and history of humans, you see this happening all the time. And what happens for us as individuals, I'm trying to make this relevant to us as individuals now, is that we often forget our identity as individuals and see ourselves simply as part of a community. We lose our own sense of judgment, and we find safety in numbers, meaning I don't have an opinion. Whatever the community leader says, that's what I shall do. If they say we go right, we go right. If they say we go left, we go left. If there is an important event, a rally, well, what does the leader say? Should we go? We go. Should we not go? We don't go. What we call the herd mentality. And I want to emphasize this point tonight. If we're going to honor this great lady and personality in Islam, I want to highlight the fact that there are times when you must have your judgment and stand alone for truth or for justice, and take that inspiration from her as opposed to simply going with the flow. But before we develop that further, let's talk about what the Quran has to say about this. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. It's very interesting that the Quran speaks of communities' birth, rise, fall, and demise as being as natural as the birth, growth, rise, weakening, old age, and demise of an individual. The only difference is it's a lot slower for a community and it's less perceptible because there are more individuals and there is a constant flow where more individuals add to the community whilst others pass away or move away from that community. So it doesn't stand out in a very startling fashion that this community has risen or fallen. Consider, for example, that the Quran uses this term ajalun musamma, a decreed fixed period of time. If you take all the verses of the Quran where this word ajal musamma is mentioned and you divide them, you will clearly see that there are themes along which the Quran uses this term. For example, the Quran in several verses says, we created you from dust. Then we gave you life, so that you may live your life ila ajalin musamma, for a fixed period of time. We have set and decreed that for you. In other places in the Quran, there are several verses that say that every night when you sleep, we take your soul away, we cause you to die. Medical science may have a different definition of death. In fact, medical science's definition of death is constantly evolving. Is brain dead really death, and so on and so forth. This is the Quran's understanding, that when you sleep, you die. And when you wake up in the morning, you resurrect again, like you shall on the Day of Judgment. And that is why we are told that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, when you look at the adab of sleeping at night, we are told that every morning when he woke up, the first thing he would say from his blessed lips was, Alhamdulillahi alladhi ahyana ba'da ma amatana wa ilayhi nushur. All praise is to Allah who caused us to come back to life after He caused us to die, and to Him is the eventual resurrection and return. So the Quran mentions this, that when you die, when you sleep, we cause you to die. And then those that we do not cause to die in their sleep, we bring them back to life, ila ajalin musamma, so that you may complete your fixed period of time and decree. Then there is other sets of verses where Allah says that if God were to punish you for the sins you commit, none of you would be left on the earth. But He gives you time to seek repentance and to mend your ways, and so that you may complete your ajalim musamma. But then this term is expanded to include everything. Communities as well have an ajalun musamma. And now you see a whole set of verses that say, and we created the heavens and the earth, and we created the stars and the moon, and we let them all run their course ila ajalin musamma. So you begin to understand here that individuals and communities both have a fixed life and a period of time. There is a red line after which you die. If you from the time of birth were to eat the perfect diet, exercise, extreme health care, and your body was maintained at the perfect BMI index, everything was perfect, you will live a long life, but you will die. It is even more certain than taxes. You will die. You cannot escape. Anything that possesses a soul, anything that is the ruh, whether it is an animal, a tree, a human, and even a community, it will die. It may die sooner from unnatural causes, and then Islam has its reasons for what prolongs life and what shortens life. For example, giving charity prolongs life. Doing good to one's parents prolongs life. Maintaining relations with your family prolongs life. Breaking relations with your family shortens your life. And so on and so forth. This is not, again, something you can prove with science, but this is Islamic adab that teach what prolongs and what shortens life. But we see the first thing is that the Quran talks of human life and community life as having a natural life, that it doesn't matter how perfect your community is and how well you maintain it, it will have a decline and it will pass away eventually. And that's why Quran constantly talks of travel in the land, look at other communities, learn from them, and so on and so forth. The other thing we see where again the Quran draws parallel between the individual and the community is on the Day of Judgment. On one hand, the Quran speaks of raising the individual back to life and self-accountability. On the other hand, the Quran speaks of the community and nation being accounted for together as one. For example, the Quran, when it speaks of Fir'aun, it says on the Day of Judgment, Fir'aun will come forth leading his community to the fire of hell. So you get this imagery that when Fir'aun is thrown into the pit of hell, his nation follow him. You know, like a domino effect, like marbles, just one knocking the other, and they all just get swept down the cliff into the fire of hell. The Quran speaks of imams as being just, but it also speaks of imams yad'una ila an-nar, a'immatin yad'una ila an-nar. There are imams who invite you to the fire of hell. Now here's the beauty of the whole thing, how at once you are part of a community, but at once you are an individual who has to be accountable for your own soul. يَوْمَ نَدْعُو كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. On that day we shall call every nation with their imam. So you as an individual belong to several communities. Let us suppose you are originally from India. So you are part of the Indian community. And then within India you belong to a particular group or ethnicity. You are Khoja or you are Hyderabadi or you are Punjabi or whatever you are. Now you are part of that community. Then you have come to Canada, mashallah, you have lived here for 20 years, now you are part of the Canadian community. And then you are Shia, Ithna Ashari, Usuli, Imamiyya, you are part of that ummah and that community. But out of all these, there is one community that you really feel you belong to. And its leaders are the ones you look up to, and they are your imams. So on one hand, the Quran says, we will not call you individually. We will call your imam, we will call the leaders. And you will naturally gravitate to the one who you see as your imam. And that is why we say it is not simply sufficient to love and admire the Ahlul Bayt. You must follow them, because when you follow them here, you will follow them there. In their fiqh, in their aqaid, in their akhlaq, in their adab, in their usul, in their tafsir. You walk in their footsteps here, you will naturally be pulled and attracted and gravitate towards them there. يَوْمَ نَدْعُو كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. But then immediately that verse, after saying we shall call every nation with their imam, it says, فَمَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ. So whoever is given his book in his right hand, فَأُولَٰئِكَ يَقْرَؤُونَ كِتَابَهُمْ وَلَا يُظْلَمُونَ فَتِيلًا. Then these are those who shall read their book with delight, and no injustice will be done to them, even to the breadth of a hair. Now do you see the same verse? On one hand it says, we shall call you with your imam. On the same verse it says, and whoever is given his book in his right hand. So you come with your imam, but you have your own book that you read. And naturally your book resembles the book of others standing with you, and you come together. In this world, what attaches you to other humans is your blood relationship, your hasab and nasab. This is my father, this is my mother, this is my brother, this is my sister. And a lot of times young children ask this question, that on the day of judgment, supposing one of my family members does not make it to Jannah, never mind, we don't worry if we'll make it, but we're worried what if another family member doesn't make it to Jannah, then will we miss them? How can I enjoy in Jannah if my brother or sister or father or mother, wal-iyadhu billah, is burning in Jahannam? No, it's not like that. When you die, your relations are severed. There is no brother, father, mother, sister. يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ. You will, even if you see them, you will run away from them on the day of judgment, because you say, they'll ask me for favors, I've got my own burden. And we have a very clear hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, Yawmul Qiyamah, there will be no relationship between humans. The only relationship will be between I and my Ahlul Bayt. We are the only ones who will still have a family relationship. Yes, the Quran says that those who make it to Jannah, we will reunite them with their fathers and their brothers and their spouses and their mothers and their children. But what happens is, on the day of judgment, your ma'yar, your measure of who you are attracted to and who you feel close to changes. It is based on iman and kufr. It is not based on blood relationship. You naturally feel affinity and closeness to someone who is like you in your khulq, in your malaka, in your essence, in your spiritual identity. There is a spiritual blood, like you have physical blood, that attaches you, and you feel this is my brother because of how close you are spiritually. Yes, you might see another individual and say, there was a world that was like a dream where we were brothers in flesh and we came from the same womb. But you won't feel it's, perhaps a good example to give is, supposing you went to school when you were 5 years old with another human being, and then you don't see him for 40, 50 years, and then you meet and you say, we went to nursery together. How close do you feel? There is a bit of interest in it, isn't it? That yes, we were together, there's a bit of curiosity, but there isn't that bond, because for the last, another 45 years, you haven't been together. It is a bit like that on the day of judgment. Yes, this person was my father or my brother or my child in another world that is now like a dream. But in this world, there isn't that sense of closeness until the accounts have been settled. So I digressed here a little bit, but again, the Quran is speaking of rising of nations and individuals. And then the Quran speaks of punishment as well. And again, we find it very interesting that sometimes the Quran speaks of an individual being punished, and sometimes it speaks of a nation being punished. And the methods by which an individual is punished, again, is very similar to how a nation is punished. Sometimes the punishment is dramatic. Earthquake, volcano, brimstone, raining stones from the sky, flood, so on. Sometimes it is imperceptible. The community stagnates, the economy goes down, children are not being born, a lot of people growing old, deteriorates, illness, moral values decline, and the community dies and is punished very, very slowly. The same happens for individuals. Sometimes a nation is punished with what we call quote unquote bad things, loss of wealth, loss of children, loss of health, so on. Sometimes a community is punished with quote unquote good things. The more they sin, the more wealth they get, the more pleasure they get, the more they are distracted from the remembrance of God and their attention is turned towards the world. Do not think, the Quran says, this is good for them. بَلْ هُوَ شَرٌّ لَهُمْ. This is actually evil for them. But they do not realize. And this is a concept we've spoken about before. It is called istidraj. سَنَسْتَدْرِجُهُمْ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. We will take them from a place they never imagined. So individuals as well get punished in the same way as we see this get punished. Now, I come to the verse of Quran that I began the majlis with. That Allah in Surah Al-Isra, chapter 17, verse 16, tells us how He destroys nations. وَإِذَا أَرَدْنَا أَن نُهْلِكَ قَرْيَةً. And when we have made this intention that we want to destroy a town or a city or a nation, أَمَرْنَا مُتْرَفِيهَا. We command the mutrafin in that community, and I shall define it. فَفَسَقُوا فِيهَا. So they begin transgressing in that community. فَحَقَّ عَلَيْهَا الْقَوْلُ. So the decree of punishment comes to pass. It now becomes deserving of that. فَدَمَّرْنَاهَا تَدْمِيرًا. Then we decimate it and utterly destroy it. Now again, those in whose heart is a disease, when they read this, they say, well, so when Allah wants to destroy a nation, He tells the transgressors to start committing sins, and then He punishes them, right? That's not exactly what the verse is saying. Mutrafin has many, many meanings. If you look at different translations of the Quran, you will see different interpretations for it. Some translators explain mutrafin as the elite and the affluent, those in the community who are wealthy but sinful. Some translate mutrafin as those who love comfort and ease. Some translate mutrifin as those who are constantly in pursuit of physical pleasure, who remember Allah very little and their occupation all day is with dunya. But they are the powerful in the community. Even when they don't hold power, they influence those in positions of leadership. And in every community there are individuals like this. Even in the time of Fir'aun, you see in the Quran refers to them as the mala'. Al-mala' are the elite, the high status in society who are corrupt. Now look at the verse again. وَإِذَا أَرَدْنَا أَن نُهْلِكَ قَرْيَةً. And when we want to destroy a nation, أَمَرْنَا مُتْرَفِيهَا. We command these elite, these mutrafin. What do we command them? We command them to do good. We command them, we send a prophet and we tell them to start obeying and to stop their evil ways. That is what amarna means. Amarna mutrafiha. فَفَسَقُوا فِيهَا. And they in response rebel. And they begin committing transgression. And because of that, they become deserving of punishment. You can see the dilemma here. On one hand, if Allah was not to send a guide and a warner, then these same people would complain on the Day of Judgment. You did not send us a guide. If you would have sent us, we would have been guided. On the other hand, when He sends a guide, they oppose, and that becomes the cause of their destruction. Because once Allah sends you a prophet, and then you still deny and you kill the prophet or oppose him, then you become deserving of physical and immediate punishment. And then therefore the Quran gives example of this mutrafin. It gives the example of Nuh. Look at the example of Nuh. When we sent him to the community, the mutrafin opposed him, then we destroy them. Look at the example of Fir'aun. Look at the example of Ad and Thamud. Look at the example of Lut. And the Quran says, and here, Lut's people are not far from you. Go and see their ruins. Go and see this. Why is the Quran giving example after example? Because they want humans to learn from the past and from history and say, look at what happens when you let your community be led by elites who are not religious and pious. They speak on your behalf. And then what happens is, you all become deserving of punishment, unless the few amongst you stand up and speak against this. One of the reasons I chose this subject as well is that, as you know, many of you know here, and many of you are here present, because we are also marking the 40th of Marhum Hassan Ali Muhammad Jaffer, who was not only an elder in our family, but an elder of this community as well, the Khoja community. Those of you who are not from the Khoja community, you probably only know him as Hyder Bai's father. But those of you who are Khojas, you know that he was regarded as an elder in the community, and he left his legacy by writing profusely on the history of this community. And he was one of those who either met some of the founding fathers of this community from East Africa or knew their history widely and traveled and so on. And when you look at his writings and his books, you know, his titles are very interesting. He writes, you know, titles like The Endangered Species or Wither My Community. And, you know, when he'd visit Canada, I'd make it a point to go sit with him, because I always found it very refreshing and interesting to learn from him and see the history of this community and his perspective. And one of his concerns, not necessarily for all the Khojas in all parts of the world, but certainly for some parts of the world, was the decline of the community. And he saw this directly as a problem because of the community stagnating in its leadership and its understanding. And again, not speaking of all parts of the world, but certainly certain places. And he'd give me examples. He'd show me video clips of where, for example, he's attending a conference that is either continental or global, and I won't mention where, but some of you may be familiar with this, where, you know, there'd be a gathering, there'd be elders sitting on the podium, and there'd be question time, and people would be invited to contribute their thoughts, and he would stand up and speak passionately about the community's problems and what we need to do. He'd make an appeal about the youth, about tapping into, you know, the potential and power of the women in our community, and so on and so forth. And he'd go on for 10, 15 minutes. And after that, he'd get people staring at him like deers in headlights, totally not knowing where this came from or how to react. And then a pat on the back. Thank you very much. Bosaru, Hassan Bhai. Ahsant. Next, any other question? You know? And this really broke his heart at times. And he would tell me, I just sit at home. I don't even go out and talk to the community anymore, right? So we need to really think about this and understand. And the point I want to make here again is that a lot of times our attitude when we speak of nations and communities is that we think of ourselves as part of a community, but we forget our accountability as individuals. That if we see something wrong, and I'm not speaking of anything in particular here, we have an obligation to stand alone, sometimes against the nation. What is important is to realize, is my nation on the rise or on the fall? Why? Because, as I said, every nation rises and every nation falls. And what I have come to believe is that while it is possible for an entire community to attain salvation, as in the case of the Prophet Yunus, a community at the end of the day is nonetheless made up of individuals. It is the individuals that make the community. And what I have come to realize is that in the rise and in the fall of communities, there is a harvesting of souls. What do I mean when I say a harvesting of souls? What I mean is that Allah's ultimate aim is not the whole community, but you, the individual. It is your soul that Allah wants to harvest and save. You look at, for example, in Surah Ali Imran, when he talks about why he lets Muslims suffer. The Muslims have sacrificed, they're supporting the Prophet, they're fighting for Islam. Why does he let him suffer? And in Surah Al-Imran around verse 140 and so on, and 41, 42 and so on, very interesting conversation. This is after the battle of Uhud, right? He says, إِن يَمْسَسْكُمْ قَرْحٌ فَقَدْ مَسَّ الْقَوْمَ قَرْحٌ مِثْلَهُ. If misfortune has befallen you, then misfortune has befallen others as well in your community. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And these days of fortunes and misfortunes, we rotate them amongst people. Today I may be happy, feeling secure, having my family, having my loved ones, having a good job. You are suffering your misfortune. You have lost a father, you have lost a loved one, you have lost a job. Tomorrow it rotates. I suffer, you are in ease. Thereafter someone else. Why does Allah allow this tudawilu bayna nas, this rotation of days? It is so that Allah may know who amongst you has faith. وَيَتَّخِذْ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. And so that He may take from amongst you martyrs. And then the next verse says, and so that he may purge and purify those amongst you who have faith and punish those who are faithless. And then he says, or do you think you will enter paradise when Allah has not seen yet who amongst you struggles in his way and who amongst you has sabr and patience? And you know from Surah Al-Ankabut, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Do people think we will leave them alone because they say we have faith and we will not test them? The Quran is saying, where did you ever get this imagination that we can be fooled with your tongue? We will test you. And now when you look at history, you will find that there is this constant, good and bad that befalls the pious and the impious. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. If you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And so what I have come to realize is that as the community rises and falls, Allah harvests souls of as many as He can take. But what happens is, when the community is on a rise, He harvests a larger number because it's easier. And this is beautifully put in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, where He says, ثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنَ الْآخِرِينَ. When the community begins to fall, then again the harvesting continues, but now there are fewer souls that are taken from it. So it is important that as the community rises and falls, and there is an ebb and a flow, and there is a waxing and a waning, that you identify this, and that when it is on the rise, you ride the wave, and when it is on the fall, you ensure that you don't drown with the community. Not because you are selfish, but because at the end of the day, it is your soul that matters. You see this example constantly in history. A lot of times we ask ourselves this question, that if I was in 61 age, would I have responded to Imam Hussein? Why do you think the majority of the people of Kufa did not respond to Imam Hussein alayhi salam? Why did individuals like Habib and Muslim bin Awsaja respond? Because Muslim and Habib did not have the herd mentality. They stayed with the community, they helped the community, they contributed to the community. When Muslim bin Aqil came, they supported him, they did as much as they can to keep the community together and support Hussein. But when they realized it is falling, they did not allow it to drown them. They learned to save their souls. And so we must never have this idea that whatever they say, we'll go with it. Moon of Ramadan happened or didn't happen? It happened, okay, if they say, we do it. At some point we don't know, but sometimes we also need to open our eyes and ask. We must have the courage. We look at the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that when he came, when he came to preach Islam, there was a fall. He began to bring a rise in Islam. He found dedicated people to follow him. As the Quran says, وَكُنْتُمْ عَلَى شَفَى حُفْرَةٍ مِّنَ النَّارِ فَأَنْقَذَكُمْ مِنْهَا. You were on the brink of fire when he rescued you. There was a harvesting of souls. But we find immediately after the demise of the Prophet, when leadership and power falls away from the true Imams, there is a decline. And now there is a fall. So there are less souls that are harvested. Then we find Amir al-Mu'mineen takes on the Zahiri Khilafat, and again there is a rise. And the Umayyads come to power, and again it falls. And within 50 years, we find 3 Imams have been martyred. One in sujood in the month of Ramadan. One has been poisoned until he coughs up his liver. Another is kept hungry and thirsty and massacred in the desert 50 years after the Prophet. How does this happen in the community? And what do those individuals who inspire us teach us? We see that this is where Imam Hussein alayhi salam has a brilliant plan, that Hussein did not come to Karbala by accident. He takes his family with him and he plants them in Karbala, knowing fully well that Yazid will want to gloat and he will take the women as captives, because Yazid does not know who Zaynab is. But Hussein knows that if my Jad has not broken the Umayyads, and if my father has not broken the Umayyads, and if my brother Hassan has not defeated them, and if I cannot reach my hand all the way to Damascus, then Zaynab will do it. Just like Fir'aun brought Musa into his palace not knowing what he was doing, but Allah knew, Yazid brought Zaynab into his palace not knowing that she is no less than Amirul Mu'mineen. 1400 years later, she inspires us. Her knowledge is so profound that when the Muslim nation is on the rise and Amir al-Mu'mineen is the caliph in Kufa, she is teaching tafsir of Quran. In an Arab nation where the mentality was, if your father is the king or the ruler, you are a princess. She doesn't live like a princess. She lives like an alima, where a ma'soom imam tells her, you have knowledge from a source that is divine. Alima ghayr mu'allima. You have not been taught by a human. She is doing tafsir of Quran. And when it is on a decline, she stands alone. But she does not allow to be swept with that community. Her other title is Ummul Masa'ib. This Ummul Masa'ib, I want to speak about it for a few minutes before I come to Masa'ib. You see, a lot of times when we say Ummul Masa'ib, we think she is called Ummul Masa'ib because she is female, because she is a lady, because means mother. That if this title was given to Imam al-Hussein, he would have been Abul Masa'ib. But in Arabic language, the word also means the origin, the source, the foundation, the axis around which things rotate. You see, in Arabic, when you want to say something very central, you use the word right? When they say the mother of all battles, they say Ummul Harb or Hurub. Mecca was the center of Arabia. It was called Ummul Qura. Surah Al-Fatiha is sometimes called Ummul Quran. The Quran is said to have been watered down and sent down from a higher source. But it was watered down so humans could understand it. And this original source is called Ummul Kitab. A capital city, for example, is sometimes called Ummul Watan. So is central. So when we say Zaynab is Ummul Masa'ib, I want to draw your minds to this idea that she is not Ummul Masa'ib as only the mother of suffering and misfortune, but she is the center, the axis, the origin, the foundation of all misfortunes that befall those who have faith. So that whatever your affliction and suffering may be, a lot of times we tell people to find solace and comfort in the Masa'ib of Hussein alayhi salam. But I tell you, when you cannot find solace and comfort in anything else, then reflect on the musibah of Zaynab alayhi salam. She will inspire you in ways that you cannot imagine. You know, I have a dear friend who passed away just about 3 weeks ago after a long battle with cancer. And he had all but stopped even going to the mosque because with all the chemotherapy and so on, you know, he couldn't bear scents and people applied perfume and so on. And about, a month or two ago when we were marking the wiladat of Sayyida Zaynab alayhi salam, I used to speak to him often, and he said to me, today I'm going to the mosque. I said to him, why are you going to the mosque? Because I know the scent, and today is wiladat of Sayyida Zaynab, there will be perfume, people will be applying, it will bother you. He said, I have to go and pay my respects to this bibi. And these are his exact words in Gujarati. He said to me, bibi no haq ada karwa jauj. So I said to him, what do you mean that you're going to pay your respects and this haqq that you do ada of Zaynab alayhi salam? He said, in the 8 years that I have known that I'm fighting this illness, and in the last 6 months when the doctors have told me you will not live longer than 6 months, and almost to the date he lived for only 6 months, anyone in that situation would have gone mad. And I have seen very few people like him who had such courage. But he says, what keeps me going every day is the words of Zaynab alayhi salam. And I said, what words are these? He said, when Yazid had taken everything she had, when he had killed her sons and her brother, when he had tied her in ropes and chains, when he had trampled the body of her brother, when he had brought her to his darbar, where his ambassadors and viziers were sitting on thrones, when he thought he had broken Zaynab, and then he looked at her and said, "O Zaynab, now that Allah has killed your brother and your sons, and now that Allah has punished you in this manner, what do you think of what Allah has done with you and your family?" He said, Zaynab looked back at him and said, Ma ra'aytu illa jamila. I have not seen anything in Allah's decree except beauty. And he said to me, I have to go and do this haqq ada and thank her that if I have withstood my suffering, it is because of these words that ring in my ears. Ma ra'aytu illa jamila. You see, 1400 years later, how she inspires. If you understand who Zaynab alayhi salam is. And I am being audacious in saying that the masa'ib of Zaynab was greater than the masa'ib of Hussein. Why? Because at the end of Hussein's trials, there was shahada, there was maqam. He went back to Rasulullah. There was the end of his thirst and hunger. He was again with his Aliyun al-Akbar and Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. But Zaynab alayhi salam had to continue living with the loss of Hussein. And having to live behind, to stay behind, knowing you have lost someone like Hussein, that is the musibah that is unbearable. And we trace her masa'ib and we see that from the time she left Medina, it continues to mount, and why she deserves this title of al-Masa'ib. When Hussein alayhi salam announces that I am now leaving Medina forever and I will not come back, Zaynab alayhi salam says, I will go with my brother Hussein, I will not stay back. It is as if Zaynab is hoping that if I go with Hussein, somehow I will save him. So she comes with him to Makkah. When this qafila comes from Makkah to Karbala, and the horse of Hussein will not move forward, and Aba Abdullah says to his brother Abu al-Fadl, dismount, we will camp here now, this is our home. Then Zaynab comes to her brother Hussein and says, Akhi Hussein, can we not move away from this land? I do not feel comfort, I find myself restless, my heart is restless in this land. And when Hussein asks his sister Zaynab, what is it that makes you restless in this land? She says, I can hear the voice of a lady crying, Wa Husayna, Wa Gurbata. But Zaynab's aim is to save Hussein. She wants to move away from Karbala so that perhaps my Hussein will be saved. The days go by, but Hussein is in Karbala. When the troops of Yazid come one after the other, and Zaynab is thinking, now how do I save my Hussein? She comes to Hussein and says, my brother Hussein, do you not have any Habib who can come and help us? She is still trying to save our Hussein. But Habib and Muslim are gone. Zaynab gives her sons to save Hussein, but Hussein is not saved. Zaynab gives her Abbas and the brothers of Abbas, but her Hussein is not saved. al-Masa'ib gives her Aliyun al-Akbar and Qasim. Alas, Zaynab gives her infant, but Hussein is not saved. You will see that on the day of Ashura, that even when Imam as-Sajjad is dragging his sword on the hot sands of Karbala and says, I'm going for jihad, Zaynab does not stop Sajjad until Hussein says, Zaynab, hold back Sajjad. Because the Imamat depends on him, because Zaynab wants to save Hussein. But when al-Masa'ib realizes that Hussein cannot be saved, and for the last time she bids farewell to her brother, I do not know how Zaynab saw Hussein leaving for the Maidan, but Hussein gave her an amana and said, Oh Zaynab, whenever you feel pain of my loss, turn your attention to my Sakina. She will be the source of comfort. Oh Zaynab, when you find water, then give water to my Sakina and take her back to Medina with you. Zaynab holds the child and watches her brother in the Maidan doing jihad. The Arbab of Azhar say that when Hussein disappears from the sight of Zaynab, then Zaynab runs out to the battlefield. She looks for a mount and stands over it. She is looking for her brother Hussein. The author Muhammad Kazim al-Qazwini in his book Zaynab min al-Mahdi ila al-Lahad, he says when Zaynab saw the body of a man on the hot sands of Karbala, he was grabbing the sand sometimes with his right hand and sometimes with his left. He was moving his legs, writhing with pain, and there was blood flowing from his body. Then Zaynab ran out to the Maidan. She came and sat beside the body. She saw a body that was filled with arrows and wounded beyond recognition. She could not recognize who this was. Now Muhammad Kazim al-Qazwini writes, he says, Zaynab sat beside the man and began saying, Antal Hussein? Are you my brother Hussein? Anta akhi? أنت نور بصري. Speak to me. أنت مهجة فؤادي. Are you the apple of my eye? أنت ابن الزهراء. When Zaynab got no response, she thought perhaps Hussein will open his eyes if I encourage him. She began saying, Anta Himana, are you the only one left to protect us now? Anta Rajana, are you the only one in whom we have hope now? But Hussein opened his eyes. Zaynab recognized her brother Hussein. Hussein said, Zaynab, go back. Zaynab came back and stood at the till. She stood and watched shimmer on the chest of Hussein. She kept crying, Yabna Saad, will you remain quiet? Will you keep watching while they kill Abu Abdullah? She looked to the heavens and cried, Alas, if only the heavens will fall to save my Hussein. But from here onwards the Masaib kept mounting on Zaynab. Sometimes she ran into the tent to save Imamat. Sometimes she went looking for Sakina. Sometimes she cried over the trampled body of Hussein. Zaynab went back to Medina. The Arbab of Azaz say Zaynab lived for only 6 months or a few years after this. She was brought back to Sham by Yazid. Some say she preached in Cairo and Yazid brought her to Sham. Some say she was poisoned. Others say a farmer who loved Yazid hit her with a spade on the head and injured her. But when Zaynab rested in Sham, she took her place again as the one who freed Sham, as if calling out to Hussein and saying, Oh Hussein, you left your amana with me. I left your amana in the prison of Sham. I have returned to Sham to rest with your daughter Sakina until the Yawm al-Qiyamah. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماطم حسين يا حسين